All right, let's talk about something huge. International trade. It's this invisible force that connects pretty much everything in your life to a factory or a farm on the other side of the world. And wow, does it spark some heated debates. Everybody has an opinion, but the actual economics behind it all can be, well, pretty surprising. So let's dive in and really unpack this great trade debate.
So here's the plan. First, we're going to look at the Great Debate itself. Then we'll get into the one core economic idea you absolutely have to understand to make sense of any of this. From there, we'll see who really wins and who loses, because it's not always simple. Then we'll check out how trade barriers actually work, bust some of the most common myths you hear all the time, and finally, we'll get into the politics of it all, which is where it gets really interesting.
Okay, first up, the great debate. Let's just get right to the heart of it. All of this stuff being shipped around the world, is it actually making us better off? Is it a good thing or a bad thing? I mean, have you ever really stopped and just looked around? Your phone, the shoes you're wearing, maybe even the coffee cup on your desk. It seems like almost everything has a made in somewhere else tag on it. Why is that? It's kind of wild when you think about it. A quick scan of your own stuff really drives this home, right? You've got electronics from Asia. Your car might be from Germany or Japan. Even when you call tech support, the person on the other end might be in India. Our daily lives are just completely woven into this massive global system, whether we realize it or not. And this is the question that really fuels the entire debate. It's a concern you hear all the time, and it's a totally fair one. If workers in another country get paid way, way less, how on earth can our local companies and our local workers possibly compete? It feels like an impossible fight. To answer that, we need to dig into one crucial economic idea. And that one idea, the concept that really unlocks this whole puzzle, is something called comparative advantage. Now, I know it sounds a little academic, but trust me, this is the engine that makes almost all of international trade work. Now, the key phrase here you gotta remember is opportunity cost. It's not about who can make something the cheapest or the fastest. It's about what you have to give up to do something. So think of it this way. Even if a top brain surgeon is also the world's fastest typist, should she be typing her own emails? No way. Every minute she spends typing is a minute she's not performing a life-saving surgery, which creates way more value. The opportunity cost of her typing is just too high. Well, it's the exact same logic for countries. And this is a perfect way to see it in action. The United States could make t-shirts, of course, but to do that, it would have to pull a lot of skilled workers and resources away from doing things it's incredibly efficient at, like building airplanes. The opportunity cost is just too high. On the other hand, China can produce t-shirts at a much lower opportunity cost. So what makes the most sense? The US specializes in airplanes, China specializes in t-shirts, and they trade. That way, both countries get what they need for a lower overall cost. Okay, so that all sounds pretty great. Specialize, trade, create more stuff for less cost, everybody wins, right? Well, not exactly. The country as a whole might be better off, but that value isn't shared equally. And this is where we get to the really difficult, really human part of this topic, the winners and the losers.
And this gets right to the uncomfortable truth of the whole debate. When you look at the big picture, trade makes the whole economic pie bigger, but it also changes how the slices are divided up. And for some people, their slice can shrink or even disappear completely.
Let's go back to our t-shirt example. Before trade, an American-made t-shirt costs $8. Then we open up to imports, and suddenly you can buy one for the world price of $5. Who wins? Every single person who buys a t-shirt. We all get cheaper clothes. But who loses? The US t-shirt factory and its workers. They can't compete with the $5 price. And here's the brutal math. The total gain for all of us consumers is bigger than the total loss for the producers. But, try telling that to someone who just lost their job. That bigger pie doesn't mean much to them. So, to try and protect those local producers and workers who are losing out, governments often step in. And that brings us to trade barriers. Most of the time, we're talking about tariffs. Let's break down how they actually work. A tariff is really just a tax you put on something coming into the country. It's not simple. So let's say the government puts a $2 tariff on those imported t-shirts. That $5 world price instantly becomes $7 here in the US. And that one move sets off a whole chain reaction. The price goes up. Then, since they're more expensive, Americans buy fewer t-shirts. The American t-shirt producers, though, can now compete at that $7 price, so they start making more. And finally, the number of t-shirts we import drops way down. So what's the end result of all that? Well, the tariff definitely helps a few domestic t-shirt makers. But it hurts all of us consumers. And on top of that, it creates this thing that economists call a deadweight loss. It's a weird phrase, but it just means a loss that benefits no one.
It's not tax money for the government, it's not profit for a company, it's just economic value that vanishes into thin air. The system becomes less efficient, and society as a whole is officially worse off. So if tariffs have this downside, why are they so popular? Well, it's because the arguments for protecting industries are often really powerful and persuasive, even if the economics are shaky. So let's go into myth-busting mode and tackle a couple of the big ones.
This is the big one. You have definitely heard this argument before. The idea is that if we restrict imports, we protect our local industries, and that will save jobs from going overseas. On the surface, it makes perfect sense.
But when you actually look at the data, the reality is pretty shocking. Yes, tariffs can save some jobs in a specific industry, but the cost to everyone else is astronomical. One study found that to save a single job in the U.S. textile industry, it costs consumers over $220,000 a year in the form of higher prices. And that's not the whole story either. Trade isn't just a one-way street of job destruction. It also creates new jobs, often better-paying ones, in the industries where we're exporting goods to the rest of the world.
And this brings us right back to that question from the beginning. It just seems like common sense, right? How can a worker making $30 an hour possibly compete with a worker in another country who's making $3 an hour?
The reality is that the wage rate is only half of the equation. The other, and arguably more important half, is productivity. A high-wage worker with amazing technology and training might produce 20 times more stuff in an hour than a low-wage worker without those advantages. So when you look at the labor cost per item, the high-wage worker can actually be cheaper. That's why the U.S. doesn't compete on cheap labor, it competes on high productivity in areas like financial services, software, and advanced manufacturing.
Okay, so if the economics of free trade are so compelling, and these common myths don't really hold up to scrutiny, why do we still have so many tariffs and trade barriers all over the place? Well, you probably already know the answer. It's not about economics, it's about politics.
A key concept here is something called rent-seeking. It's a fancy-sounding term for a really simple idea. It's when a group tries to make money not by creating new value, but by getting the government to change the rules to benefit them at the expense of others. A tariff is a classic example of rent-seeking. An industry lobbies for protection, which lets them grab a bigger slice of the pie, even if it makes the total pie smaller for everyone else.
And this is why the political fight over trade is so lopsided. Think about it. The losers from free trade are a small, concentrated group, like the workers and owners of a specific factory. For them, the losses are huge. Their whole livelihood might be at stake. So they are extremely motivated to lobby politicians for protection. Now, who are the winners from free trade? It's a huge group, basically all of us, the consumers. But the gains for each of us are tiny, a few bucks off a t-shirt. So we have very little motivation to organize and fight for it. A small, loud, highly motivated group almost always wins against a huge, quiet one.
And history really shows us what's at stake here. The famous, or infamous, Smoot-Hawley tariff in the 1930s raised tariffs to sky-high levels. It sparked a retaliatory trade war around the globe that made the Great Depression so much worse. That disaster was so bad that it led to decades of international cooperation to lower trade barriers, bringing us to the near-historic lows we saw by 2009.
Which leaves us with the ultimate question, doesn't it? We know the economic pie gets bigger with trade, but we also know that some people get a much smaller slice, or even lose their slice entirely. So the real challenge isn't whether we should trade, it's how we manage the consequences. How can we harness all the massive benefits of globalization while also finding better ways to support the people and communities that get hurt by it? That is the real trade debate.